Welcome and thank you for joining us today. The symposium accompanies On the Origins of the 21st Century, or The Fall of Communism as Seen in Gay Pornography, a cluster of exhibitions here at the Kunstverein in Hamburg that's organized into 5 chapters. Together, these exhibitions investigate the role of intimacy, gender, and sexuality within visual culture framed by the political regime changes that have shaped Europe from the 1980s through today. Dina Akhmadeeva, Erika Balsam, Angela Harounian, Elisa R. Lin, who due to unforeseen circumstances cannot be here with us today, and Pierre-Alexandre Mateus and Charles Tessou each present artworks and materials that engage the period surrounding the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of socialism in Europe. Within this context, the project reflects on both the newly gained liberties and the renewed struggles around gender and sexuality at the turn of the millennium, an era marked by shifting hegemonies and defined by power vacua, both set against the unmistakable atmosphere of a triumphalist optimism in the West, commonly referred to by Francis Fukuyama's term, the end of history. The exhibition project came about from early conversations with Erika Balsam and Angela Harounian, in which I approached you both interested in thinking about how postmodernity was experienced and felt as a bodily phenomenon. Balsam and Harounian happened to both be researching topics related to the erotic and its appearance in media, and I'm grateful for Balsam for pointing me in the direction of the 2 works contained in the cluster's title. Jean-Luc Godard's Origins of the 21st Century from the year 2000, and William E. Jones' The Fall of Communism as Seen in Gay Pornography from 1998. Both works reflect and in many ways anticipate developments in visual culture by collating violent and erotic material. Godard's film, commissioned by the Cannes Film Festival in 2000 to mark cinema's entry into its second full century, interweaves found footage, documentary, and cinematic imagery of anonymous crowds and individuals, scenes of extreme violence, and moments of spiritual and sexual elation in both black and white and color. As a prologue to the exhibition cluster, it proposes an ostensible filmic canon, a kind of moving image atlas in which fiction and documentation are continually read against one another, sometimes indistinguishable, each contributing to the telling and retelling of the 20th century as the century in which media became cognition materialized. Jones' film, on the other hand, opens with the remark, even in an unlikely place, it's possible to find traces of recent history. The Fall of Communism as Seen in Gay Pornography analyzes scenes from Eastern European pornography produced between 1993 and 1998, material made for export and financed largely by Western money. At the time, new mediascapes and technologies such as VHS and satellite television enabled these pornographic films to circulate far beyond previously available channels. Jones' film thus becomes an archive of the early post-Soviet infiltration of Western ideology, particularly apparent when the men recorded in the so-called screen tests speak about their personal desires. Their long, uninterrupted gazes into the camera lend them a humanity that stands in tension, if not contradiction, with a context that trades their presence primarily as commodity. The conflict between humanity and objectification, desire and commodification, technology and structural change, late capitalism, and fragile notions of freedom lie at the very center of On the Origins of the 21st Century, or The Fall of Communism as Seen in Gay Pornography. And today's lectures and conversations will all deal with certain aspects of this that sit in extension of the many exhibition projects here at the Kunstverein. Across the 5 sections, the exhibition reflects on a moment when the mainstream finds itself suddenly confronted with rapidly shifting thresholds between private and public identities, reshaped through the circulation of uncensored material on VHS. Television and video become dominant tools of cultural transformation, public discourse, biopolitics, and open a new political space of action and produce new political subjectivities and embodied desires. The sections together consider sexual emancipation and its administration and point toward the entangled relationship between personal freedom, the commodification of desire, discipline, and surveillance within an accelerating postmodernity driven by intensifying image circulation, an acceleration that contributed to the erosion of the grand narratives of the 20th century and have become foundational to the digital age. At this moment, I'd like to thank Christian Becher, who isn't here with us today, Dr. Martin Karcher and Sarah Messerschmidt, who co-organized the exhibition with me and will be introducing some of today's speakers. My thanks also go to all the participating curators, to the many artists who are part of this exhibition, the Sammlung Falkenberg and the Deichtorhallen Franziska Markus, Otis Douceur, and Tao Lemin, and the Behörde für Kultur und Medien, without whom today wouldn't have been possible. Thank you. So it's a great honor to be able to introduce today's first speakers, Daučíková and Dina Akhmadeeva. Yeah, it's a real honor to have you here, and yeah, I'll just get started on my thing. Daučíková lives and works in Prague. In their practice, they work with painting, photography, video, and performance, exploring authorship, gender, and sexuality. Alongside their artistic work, they were a co-founder, an activist in several women's NGOs, co-founded the feminist cultural journal Aspect, and were a spokesperson for LGBT rights in the 1990s in Slovakia. Daučíková taught at the Academy of Fine Arts and Design in Bratislava and the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague, and their work has been exhibited in numerous international exhibitions, amongst them Documenta 14 in 2017, and exhibitions at Tate Modern, curated by Dina, and Kunstwerke in Berlin as part of the Sharing Stiftung stipend. Dina Akhmadeeva is a London-based curator, writer, and art historian whose work engages with embodiment and liveness, transnational art histories, and the limits of visibility and representation. She's currently based at Tate Modern, where she curates exhibitions, displays, new commissions, and performances, and develops the collection with a focus on artistic practices from Central and Eastern Europe. There, Akhmadeeva has developed projects with artists including Jerome Ellis, Shu Lei Shang, Daučíková, Nikita Gale, Felix Gonzalez Torres, Palma Heke, Anu Puda, Saudat Ismailova, and Aramayani, among others. She co-curated the 2023-24 Hyundai Commission for Tate Modern's Turbine Hall, as well as the 2022-23 exhibition with Magdalena Abakanovic. Independently, her projects include the 13th Baltic Triennial in Vilnius in 2018, as well as exhibitions at MHKA in Antwerp and Futura in Prague. In their presentation, Daučíková Surveil, Dina Akhmadeeva and Daučíková collaborate around a single work presentation of Daučíková's 33 situations, which inventories stories of secret, covert, and imagined sex lives during Daučíková's 12 years in Moscow from the late 1970s onwards. Daučíková attributed their first taking up of the camera's lens to that period as a response to a palpable sense of surveillance they experienced in Moscow as a queer person and as a foreigner. Distinctive in their practice, 33 situations inverts the camera's surveilling gaze back onto the Soviet bureaucratic apparatus and its actors, centering their conversation on their work within Daučíková's visuality and 5-decade-long artistic practice. Daučíková and Akhmadeeva discuss non-normative forms of evidence, structures of legibility and visibility, sexuality's potency to create disorder among prescribed social structures, and the possibilities of queer agency at the intersection of intimacy and power. Please help me welcome Dina Akhmadeeva and Daučíková.
So thank you, Milan, Sarah, Martin, and the Kunstverein team for organizing and holding this tentacular exhibition and symposium so carefully and so thoughtfully. And as Milan has said, chapter 2 of the exhibition is the result of an ongoing collaboration between me and Anna Daučíková, which started back in 2017 when I came knocking on their door, I believe, and which previously, again, as Milan has said, resulted in our work together as artist and curator at Tate Modern, where I work. I think I mentioned it earlier, but it's a presentation that's succinct in the space of the Kunstverein exhibition, but really not in time, because the focus of it is a nearly 2-hour work from 2015 called 33 Situations, which deals with Daučíková's 12-year-long stay in Moscow from the late 1970s, so coming from Bratislava in Czechoslovakia then, now Slovakia. It's really key, I believe very strongly, for questions with which we're grappling with in today's symposium and within the exhibition more broadly, very much in its entanglement of bodies, power structures, and visual structures. And it's really an honor to be in conversation with Anna and for us to unfold some of these themes of the work. But before we do, I did promise to contextualize the specifics of our conversation in the stream of Daučíková's broader practice and thematics, so I hope you can bear with me for a couple of minutes. And really, I think it's a practice, I strongly believe it's an extraordinary practice, many do, that now spans more than 5 decades, not to remind you, 5 decades of extraordinary work in which Daučíková has worked across film or moving image more broadly, sculpture, photography, performance, and painting, with these elements really building up in layers over time, and which I think of as shaping as a certain queer time. And Anna has developed a sophisticated visual language that articulates and theorizes a state of in-betweenness and the idea of a mental body, and these are both terms that Anna has specifically developed and I think are quite specific to your practice, thinking of them as a kind of queer state of being and specifically as a transgender state of being. I think it's interesting that they've also developed these positions from a geographically rooted perspective, whether we call it Central Europe or Eastern Europe, where that identity and that mode of being came directly into contact with socialist and communist structures of power in the early decades of the practice, and then later traced capitalist, speculatively liberal, then conservative turns in which we find ourselves now. It's important that Daučíková trained in a discipline called glass architecture in Bratislava. The first time we met, Anna said, "Don't call me a glass maker." And this happened in the late 1970s. It's a very particular way of really recognizing it as an artistic discipline. And it's an important dimension because the medium of glass has come to both, in a way, shimmer, but also haunt the practice in all kinds of embedded ways, including, I think, being the optical support for what only later came to be a lens-based practice, which is what's important for our conversation today. A couple of details that I would usually find maybe too biographical or too intimate are actually very generously present in contact with Daučíková's practice and work, and in a way need to be mentioned, right, before we start to speak about this work and the world that it embodies. So in 1979, while navigating in a very, very live way their own queerness, Daučíková developed a relationship with a woman who at the time lived in Moscow. And as the writer Quinn Latimer says, I think in the biography that they write for the Documenta pages, while everybody was trying to flee from Czechoslovakia to the west, Daučíková went further east to the bureaucratic heart of the Soviet Union. But it's important to say that, of course, this was not for ideological reasons, but for very, very personal ones. And so between 1979 and 1991, Daučíková lived in the secret queer relationship, also as a foreigner, subject of suspicion because of being a foreigner in Moscow, And their reality was also that of being an artist surrounded in the day-to-day by what would be described as dissident poets, writers, and artists. And I think it's important that the context in Moscow is also actually very, very literary, right? Very text-based, very writing-based. They themselves, during that time, developed a painting practice at that time focused on numbers, systems, and also continued to work with glass. And the constant during that 12-year period, again, as Milan has mentioned, was an embedded and prevailing sense of voyeuristic surveillance by various actors of the Soviet system. So this included monitoring by nosy Soviet-loyal neighbors within suffocating communal apartment settings, monthly artist studio inspections, ongoing KGB interrogations of Daučíkova's circle, never Daučíkova themselves, which I think is very interesting, always circling, always asking questions about them, but never to them. And it was through those experiences that Daučíkova was really sensitized to being the subject of this kind of ever-present surveilling gaze. And Daučíkova left Moscow in 1991. The relationship collapsed, and the Soviet Union collapsed. Unrelated but parallelisms. And they moved back to Bratislava in 1991 and then eventually Prague, where Daučíkova worked, lived and taught and inspired others since, really developing a distinctive body of work that brings together something of a contact between individual experiences at their most intimate and political structures at their widest. It was during the 90s that they took up the lens of the video camera in their practice, this glassy object that itself for a time became a kind of phallic fascination, and also first put their body in front of the camera to experiment with the possibilities of a reversal of the surveilling gaze that they experienced back in Moscow. And I find it interesting that Daučíkova has spoken about this need to somehow process that kind of subjecthood and experience in its aftermath, or specifically that it could only happen in the aftermath. And I hope that we can discuss that also. Distinctive in their practice, the work 33 Situations from 2015, which is the subject of the chapter in our conversation, puts this gaze back onto the Soviet bureaucratic apparatus and its actors and has a very, very distinctive time span. It deals with those 12 years from Moscow, making this inventory of secret, covert and sometimes imagined sex lives during Daučíkova's stay in the Soviet Union in a visual language that mimics Soviet bureaucracy. It's a distinctive visual language that stages what I call an errant archive and opens out onto bigger questions relevant for today's symposium and wider thinking within the exhibition, including the relationship between eroticism and a kind of latent violence, the mutually encroaching spheres of the public and the private, the relationship between intimacy and discipline, the mediascapes of surveillance, and what possibility there might be for sexuality, non-normative sexuality specifically, and even sex more broadly, to unsettle state control of the body. I'm deliberately not describing the work too closely, as we'll go deeper into this in the conversation. But as a starting point, Anna and I decided that we'd like to show you a short 2.5-minute snippet which details one of these 33 situations to either refresh your memory for those who have experienced the work already or to give you a feel for the work if you have not. So thanks, Sarah.
Take something like 3 minutes. Just good to know, not 2 hours.
think even in the short snippet, there is so much to unpack. And the idea is that this is one of the 33 situations, so multiply that by 33 and you get the work, right? But even in the short snippet, there is so much. So I think, can we start by actually discussing what is happening in the work? What is it that we're looking at? And what is the connection between that and your time in the Soviet Union? And actually, what was that time like in the Soviet Union? And what are the materials here that we're looking at?
Yeah, thank you. I mean,
Hi.
first of all, thank you, Dina, for all what you said up to now. Thank you for having me here, Milan, and everybody. I'm really happy to be able now to speak about what I did with my with the luggage I brought from Soviet Union back to Europe. And I think it was, I came back in the beginning of 90s into the situation of a turbo capitalist takeoff in Czechoslovakia, and then Czechoslovakia. And nobody would like to hear about anything what was coming from Soviet Union. It was just out of any kind of discussion, and it was a closed chapter of the history, and I really couldn't do anything about it. And it took several years, almost 10 years, until I felt like this is something which needs to be, again, somehow discussed or known about, because it is something which can happen at any time, because in the 90s what happened in Czechoslovakia, and which then split it into two countries, that Slovakia became a kind of a place where a nationalism and also some kind of Soviet remnants start to be loud again. So this kind of feeling of the things are coming back in some kind of another disguise or another discussion was there. So I felt like I myself, but I didn't know what to do. And then there was a friend, Anthony Auerbach from London, who visited Bratislava, and we spoke about my past and about this kind of experience. And he said, "Why don't you do it? It's really necessary." And that was the start. I said, I'm completely like silenced with this, and I don't know how to do it. And he gave me a hand. He said, like, just start to make your memories, and we will see. So we decided that every Sunday, because I was teaching at school and I was busy with other things, every Sunday when I have a free day, I will send him one memory by email.
But as a text,
As a
specifically.
text,
Yeah.
absolutely the text which then you saw here. Yeah. So, and at that point, there was for me it was several, almost more than a year. Sometimes I sent two, when I had, it came, accumulated. But important thing was that Anthony then decided that he will produce a kind of a notebook where all these situations will be printed out, and we finance it by ourselves. So it was made by a very cheap way in a normal kind of Xerox shop where you can make. We made 100 exemplars of it, and it exists. It exists, and after that, I felt like I did it, But then the situation was all the time like asking for doing something, and at the same time, in the 90s, I started to be a spokesperson for LGBT rights. And with coming 2000 and coming Putin into his top position, and the following few years, I think many people, and partially my friends in Soviet Union and me, we knew very well that the thaw decade, 90s, is over, and there is a KGB man coming, and we have to expect the worst. Yeah? And then it started very quickly. It was not difficult to think about it, because I think that most of the people were very suspicious about why KGB took over the country again, yeah, in the figure of this man. Then in the coming years, suddenly, because I was following very closely what is happening in Soviet Union, I'm still doing, we could see that the Orthodox Church started to produce a kind of incredible propaganda, absolutely in the line of the state propaganda and politics,
about family values.
About family values, about the perverted world in comparison with the healthy Russian kind of core, I don't know, existence, which is then called Russian soul in many ways. You can hear that kind of term. So in this situation, what came from the Orthodox Church, one of the first signs, which was absolutely clear where we go, was about the same-sex relationships as a perverted variant existing in the West. Yeah?
So something that came from outside.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't quote, but I remember, I don't know, Patriarch Kirill, who was that, who said that how did he say that? Yeah, that such thing never existed in Russia.
Mm.
You know, and that was the moment when I decided it's not enough with the 100 kind of pile of the notebooks, but I need to elaborate further. So I called Anthony, saying like, Anthony, I'm going to make another project, and I invited you in, and Anthony is one of the testimonies here. And then what was the project was that all this 33 situation, which was already published, I wanted to place into the privacy, into the flats of the queer people I know, or the people who are at least weird enough, they maybe not exactly fitting into the queer spectrum, but still living kind of either autistic or some kind of existence which is not normative. So all this, there are less of them, this kind, mostly they are queer, but I decided to ask these friends to choose one of the situation and let me visit them in their interior and use their window for presenting it and use and take their face as evidence of testimony that it really exists or something, as an evidence, you know. Because the structure of every situation is in a way touching the problem of dossier, of report, of medical report, of this
KGB
kind of
report.
KGB report, this kind of institutional elaboration on some kind of surveilled person who is suspicious of some kind of special activities, yeah? Which was my experience during the 12 years in Moscow. When you are living as a foreigner in Moscow, first of all, if you want to leave the city, you need to go to the police and say where you go and give an address. If you don't do this, you can be taken at any time by police if you are followed by KGB. and who knows what, you know, in this situation. So there was also possible to expel me back to the Czechoslovakia, yeah. So this was one thing. The other thing was that once in a month I got an invitation from police to come and visit the police. I came to visit the police with this invitation, and police was asking me to tell them where I live and with whom, to write it down on the paper as a proclamation. And I was there 3 or 4 times, every time writing the same thing. My name is this and this, I'm living in this and this street with my friends, you know, this kind of thing. So this and this name, yeah, it was written. Police was making it absolutely unwillingly, because there is also this kind of thing that KGB and the police were 2 institutions which were not in concurrence or something like that, but at the same time, KGB was kind of burdening police with their issues, and police was executive in some very lowest level to push the inhabitants into kind of order, yeah? So police was doing this kind of thing. It was not their problem in a way, yeah? But they were doing it. So this policeman was absolutely reluctant to even ask what I'm doing or so. In a month, it was again the same, and so. So maybe this is what
part of the question. Yes, and I mean I can continue here also, which is to say, the documents that are then pinned to glass. So we have these, you know, we have this quite complex temporal structure. We have the documents that are, let's say, the stagings of memory that pulled from this 1-year period where you were remembering actually the stories of your experiences, but they're depersonalized. You will see they're all written in 3rd person. And then the biographies or stories of friends, the community that you were surrounded by, and their experiences with power structures are staged among photographs, images of these individuals, where we find ourselves suddenly in the 2010s, this network of queer individuals really speaking to the conditions of the present as it was in the run-up to 2015, and in a way has only gotten worse. What's really interesting, of course, about the documents is there is this turning of the surveillance system onto the actors of that bureaucratic system. Many of the characters who appear, and you will have seen in the 2.5-minute snippet or the situation, is this figure of the fireman who comes and makes these regular inspections of the artist's studio. The artist is Anna, of course. In a way it's distance, but it's probably quite clear. And there is this projection or kind of fantasy or imagination, maybe not in his case, in the case of others, of their own fantasies, of their own sex lives, giving a kind of very intimate, intrusive, personal edge to, in a way, this very, very faceless system, to try and reverse something of that power relationship. I mean, with the fireman, I think it was a fact, right, that he would stand on buses and squeeze the...
Yeah. The thing is that now we are coming to how I built up the figures, the persons in the dossier. Yeah? So this is a mixture. This is a mixture of different, first of all, these people really exist. I hope still some of them exist, at least. So they really existed, and the situations are not complete fiction. It is also the situations which I either heard about or I saw by myself. But in order to not to put at risk my friends who were still, and now only few of them still live, So I had to change the kind of facts about the life so that you cannot find the person according to the dossier. Yeah, so it's not dossier on these people. So I made this kind of typical take of any kind of novelist who is putting their own and real situations into the fiction by shifting it into the other countries' situations, etc., etc. So in order to make this, I just wanted to. Also, I found out that this is not documentary in the kind of thing, evidence thing, but it is a kind of also challenging the question of our memory, of our storytelling about the past, how we have to retell the things, enriching it or skipping some things, how the history is constantly being constructed, and how these evidences of what really happened is at question, yeah. But at the same time, it was a kind of a thrilling for me because we are exactly that sort of people who are kind of an enigma, and what they are doing and what these trans people are, what is the sexual life, and all these things, you know. So I felt like it needs to be brought in and let it be in. Yeah. So I would still say that everything what is written there could be called truth.
And it makes me think of this point that you raised earlier, you know, speaking back to the political moment, the idea of queer identity being a Western import. I think it's very important to state quite factly, as it were, though the word fact becomes interestingly unstable in the context of what we're discussing, but more powerfully so somehow. But this idea of the kinds of evidence that you're giving, this kind of queer testimony of the errant queer archive, you are quite simply on one level, though there's nothing simple about this work, quite simply on one level you are saying queer presence was here and part of the foundations of this culture, right?
Definitely. Not only that it is coming with the I don't know, from the 60s with the sexual revolution, and it of course 60s were also in Russia. Moscow and Leningrad, I don't know about other cities, were turbulent in around 68 with poetry, with Mayakovsky, with a lot of Voznesensky and others, Yevtushenko and Kira Muratova, and all these people were really, it was a time of very similar to what was happening in Czechoslovakia, although we were under the Iron Curtain and we couldn't know well about what is happening. We heard about Woodstock and so, you know. There was this kind of, but I lost the file now. Could you?
It was there, as in these ideas, these ways of being also.
Yeah. It exists. What I wanted to say is that it existed also before.
Yeah.
It existed historically in the real history, which was not a part of the Soviet history, of course, but today we know, for instance, that in somewhere 13th century in Ukraine, in Orthodox Church, there was a practice of so-called brotherhood. And this brotherhood was couples of monks living together, you know. So what is this, you know? What kind of Western perverted thing would be imported? This kind of thing. So it's really a kind of, for me, very interesting.
Kind of matter-of-factness.
Matter-of-factness, yes.
And of course, in the structure of the way the documents are made, as it were, or the evidence is made, there's a huge body of thought around what queer forms of evidence exist, and this idea of the testimony, the whisper, the gossip. I think it's quite well developed in the context of the US art scene. I'm thinking of a great publication on the scene of surrounding Andy Warhol. But really, I think there's something about what you're forming here is not a queer archive as such, but you're queering the archive, right? And you're introducing the forms of, let's say, evidence, legibility that are legitimate, which I think is really interesting in relation to ideas of the archive, truth-telling, and forms of truth. I really also want to speak about the specific visuality of this kind of visual regime of the work as a work, because we've now, in a way, touched upon the elements that exist within it, but it's a really, really important pivotal point in your career where, this experience that you've spoken about of existing as the surveyed subject, you have this feeling, you have this sense in your body, you've spoken in the past about it as this feeling of constant stress or a kind of internal duress that you do not experience through specific people, but rather as this total system, this watchful gaze, as it were, that you carried with you as a feeling into Czechoslovakia, then Slovakia, then Czech Republic in Prague, and felt like you had to process somehow. And so there is this very, very interesting thing that happens where you suddenly start to work with the moving image camera, specifically the video camera. You put your body in front of the camera, so you start to perform in front of the camera, and then at some point this work emerges, which in a way puts the actors of that bureaucratic system, the Soviet system, in front of the camera in as much as you could. Though I don't think that even if you had the footage, you would have used the footage. That's my speculation. But this very, very interesting visuality emerges that, a small anecdote, I suppose, when I was at the opening of this exhibition, I was chatting with somebody and they said, which one, which bit did you work on? And I said, it's the section with Anna Daučíková in this video where you really have this quite uncomfortable experience of sitting there, and as long as you, in a way, permit it, you sit in this black box and you are forced to read at the pace of the camera. You are subjected to this quite coercive visual regime that, in a way, communicates something of the visual regime that you existed in. When I say Anna develops a sophisticated visual language for ideas, they really do. So this person, when they heard that I worked on this, they said, "Yeah, I'm not going to be coming back there again." I was really uncomfortable.
Good.
And I really want to talk about that, because I really want to know how that visuality really developed for you, how that idea came about, and how that work with the camera came about, because the camera really does a lot in the way that you think about the camera, the way that the camera starts to think somehow by itself, and the way that it impresses onto us is really important here.
Yes, the camera work for me, it's a kind of very, very, how to say, important story of my art making, because I'm, as you said, coming from the glass
You're trying to
designing.
say making, I know you are.
No, glass designing period in my schooling. We were doing, in Bratislava with Václav Ziegler, my professor, a kind of almost a dissident place in the academy, because we were doing a kind of geometrical abstraction during the time of this kind of social realism dogma. So we were kind of outcasts in the school, our program. But doing this kind of geometrical blocks of glass where the optics plays with the concave and concave, convex and concave and prisma and all these kind of special reflections, you need to move around to understand what is the object about. And then many years later, because I left this kind of things like impossible to make, you need a high technology to do these kind of things, and in Soviet Union it was nothing like that existed at that time, and doesn't exist now too, apart from the Cosmos lenses. So what I want to say is that when I start to speak about Cosmos lenses, I go
You're
somewhere
gone.
else. Yeah, I'm completely gone.
Ziegler optics.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly, when I discovered camera for myself, and I bought it in the mid 90s, I understood that this kind of understanding the visuality is visuality in movement is a moving picture, is the camera work. So for me, the camera became, on one hand, the kind of agent movens in my work. On the other hand, it became a part of my body because I'm behind and before camera, in front of camera, with my hands and with the things I'm moving. When I started to work after Anthony's book about 33 situations, I understood that here is another geometry, another kind of yes, I have a modernist past in my schooling, kind of a grid which I will produce through my camera work, which is on one hand the glass membrane, transparent glass membrane, which is as if dividing externality in internality, the private and public. On the other hand, what I understood is that once I keep camera as a part of my body and I want to be institutional, to be this kind of objective surveillance eye, I have to scan the reality. So that's why this scanning coercive movement with this sharpening and blurring the picture and founding and trying to develop it from was the main main idea behind which came to me, I think, completely instinctively. You don't work that you put the things before and then you do it. You just discover by doing that this is what I'm doing. Yeah? So there was this moment of camera work as a kind of eye, which was absolutely present in my Soviet time, but not only, also before. It's so funny, but I was never really doing anything so-called against the state back in my young time in Czechoslovakia. Nevertheless, I was 3 times interrogated at KGB, just because I met a foreigner or just because, I met a priest and there was this religious thing in Slovakia is very important.
I
but
have no idea where the story is going.
Yeah.
I mean, we could listen to you for hours. I'm like, I've never heard this part before.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay, this is me. I'm sorry, but I can't.
That's amazing.
The other way.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You were interrogated for kind of contact with, I
Wha-
suppose
whatever,
the priest
but-
because of the religious, of course,
Yeah,
socialism,
yeah.
anti-religious structure.
Yeah. And in Soviet Union, we were living in communal flats. Okay, in communal flats there is a situation of the unwanted and unrequested collectivity. Yeah? It looks like a good idea why not to live together in a communal flat? Why
But
not?
I don't know
Yeah?
if anyone needs a bit of a, I don't know if
Explanation.
anyone needs a bit of a context, what it really means to live. Yes, like what the breakdown of the space is like. So you have your little bedroom, but the bedroom is for the whole family in a way.
Yeah, usually a family is living in one room, okay, 20 square meters.
Then
It's a good thing, if not 15 or 12.
And then there are like 5 families that
There
live
are
together?
5 families living in a big apartment, having one kitchen altogether, one bathroom, and one toilet together, and one telephone in the corridor. Yeah, so you are absolutely exposed to all these inhabitants with your wash and drying your wash in the kitchen up there at the ceiling, you know, with your telephone calls, which everyone hears what you are saying when Brezhnev dies, for instance. So you say, hello, congratulations, you know. This is already the secret language. I see Dmitry Vilensky is laughing. Yeah, exactly. You know, you're saying congratulations, how are you? I'm fine, I'm very happy, you know, these kind of things. So you live this kind of way, but at the same time, as it is unwanted, and you didn't choose these people to live with, there is a lot of animosity and a lot of hidden conflicts and a lot of danger that you will be next 5 minutes at the police for some kind of thing, only because your neighbor decided that she or he or they have enough of you. Yeah?
And I think one of the most widely reproduced images, it's not here, but when you search for the work online, is one of the situations that relates to this intrusive neighbor, Regina, or Regina, I think you call her,
Yes.
who is the neighbor of a lesbian couple and absolutely does not agree with this and practices what Anna calls in the work a kind of Moscow voodoo of piercing the wall between the two
To
apartments.
protect herself and her family.
With a needle, and of course the lesbian couple in question is, much more autobiographical than.
It was really artwork in a way, because we had to move from that place in 1989. It's already started with perestroika. The big flats were bought by people who have money, who made money, and these families were getting small, different other places to live in. So then when all this apartment was empty, we could walk into the neighbor's room where you never had been before. And suddenly we saw these needle things and going like here's a kind of shelves or something, there is no needles, and again around the pictures and so on. So really installation, I have to say. So this was the life of kind of strange transparency and being all the time exposed in the most unexpected or very well expected sides of your life, you know. And at the same time, what now retrospectively I think about is that also the public life, what was happening in the country, what was perestroika about in the 80s, which I had the luck to observe or live in a way partially, in how these kind of facts are entering your so-called construction of privacy in this, because you still try to construct your privacy, your intimacy, you want to defend yourself, etc. And how this life is porous, how this life of construction of subjectivity is at the same time absolutely a political thing. There I understood what it means to be a political person. Because when I came back to Bratislava again in '91, there, no communal flats, all these things. It was this kind of European setting. There was suddenly I arrived to the things where first years people tried to divide politics from the life, from their own life. That the political was this kind of socialist totalitarian state dogma. But now we are free from the dogma. We can be this kind of illusion. We can be free. We can live as we wish, and make this kind of free market society where everybody has a chance to become rich. Yeah, this kind of all this naivety. We've entered the new regime again. Was for me was quite quickly to criticize. Yeah, because I understood that it is not so, that it is still that the left and the right thinking is still there, yeah, because they felt like all is now eliminated. Like, what is this kind of funny thing, leftist ideas, So it was all like put ad acta, and it took 20 years, another 20 years until it is again on the table, everything. Yeah? So it is also the difference between different countries, how they deal with their historical settings, how they work with their how to say, economical level, because Czechoslovakia was incomparable with what I ate in Moscow as a normal food, and what was the same thing in Prague or Bratislava. It was like this, yeah.
And just to, I think that's a point that I really wanted to raise and discuss, and maybe a really nice way for us to pause here. But just to go back to this idea of glass and the mediation of, in a way, those ideas, I think it's interesting. Of course, Elisa's not here today, but thinking about the condom and thinking about the glass as these kind of semi-permeable, in a way, membranes, right? And then at the same time, thinking about a kind of, I think 33 Situations has this, almost has this sense of, it's a work that plays with these structures of domination and submission, right? I think when we as viewers are watching it, there is this very, very submissive position that we have to take in order to experience it, and I think maybe that person just did not enjoy it, who just had to leave. But the point that you make about the geographical specificities is so important for us, I think, in the context of the symposium, because we say we have the position of the DDR or the GDR or the DDR, and then we have the context of Czechoslovakia in your biography, we have the context of Moscow for a 12-year period in your biography, I think we have the context of Armenia and Angela Harutyunyan's presentation later. And these are not, I think it's really important to say with nuance, in the context of this constellational set of conversations, these are not comparable conditions, right? These are not one and the same. The Soviet Union is not the same as the kind of the socialist sphere. Moscow is not the same as Yerevan. Also, we're thinking about these centers and what might happen in the center of that power structure versus what one might be able to get away with further away from that center, right? And that I'm really curious if you can reflect a little bit more on what the differences of those conditions were, particularly in relation to sexuality, for example, or indeed conditions of surveillance, or indeed both.
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is really a good question, because I have to say that as for my love life, living in Czechoslovakia, and especially living in Slovakia, in Bratislava, which is, unlike Czechia, a Catholic country, while Czechia is a Lutheran country, and while religion in Slovakia always played a political role, and now is playing again, because we can see how the rights of LGBT and trans people are now orchestrated by Fico and bishops Catholic bishops and Christian democracy in Slovakia. So with this kind of experience of also me from religious family, coming from having a childhood, this kind of brainwashing period. So I met in Soviet Union a freedom. You know, this is the paradoxical thing, that my being completely imprisoned in celibacy, in Slovakia, I came to Moscow, and I was accepted by mostly straight people, by my circle, artists, intellectuals, etc., as normal. And I lived my love life with a woman who understood the whole thing in the Russian way. She didn't want that we identify as lesbians. She wanted that love is the main condition for doing whatever you need to do with your body. You know, so that was the thing where the difference was so extreme. And yes, the society in Soviet Union was secular, and yes, Bolshevik diminished the church into the minimum and turned it into the KGB agent. It was always collaborating with the power. All churches are doing, and churches, let's have another symposium on it. But I just want to say that this difference was abrupt. It was very, very strong. At the same time, in the daily life, you know, if I would go in Bratislava during the 70s and 80s, holding hands with a woman, or embracing or being bodily active, I would find the reaction of the people discontent. Yeah, in Soviet Union, daily life, not that you would see on the street a lot of people holding hands in same-sex couples. No, but the life was so exhausting and so difficult that people had no time to really turn to this kind of things. If someone is holding hands or kissed each other or something like that, on this very this kind of low public field, it was livable. It was unlike Bratislava. The Moscow was livable. Also a bigger city, of course, and a lot of other factors playing role. But I still think that the idea of free love, which came with the communist regime after October Revolution for a couple of years, was a sort of experience which sort of was an imprint. The Stalinists emphasized on family again and on this kind of nuclearity of the heterosexuality and all these things. Of course, diminished it into minimum, but there was still, I feel like there were in
some
the leftist thinking there are traces of that, and this is a kind of a specific thing, I think.
Well, I think you've done so much to complicate I mean, in your practice, but in this conversation also to complicate a lot of our thinking. So I'm really, really grateful for that. I know we're running a little bit over time.
Yeah.
So I wonder if maybe there's room for one or two questions. If anybody would like to ask. Shall I run around with the mic? I love doing that. Thanks.
Are there any questions at this point?
Thank you very much for this very insightful conversation. I'd also almost like to leave my talk aside and just respond in the time allocated to me in the afternoon. But I was wondering, how would you kind of compare the contemporary regime of surveillance to what you experienced in Moscow, where, you know, in a context such as this, kind of an Instagram post or a like could land someone being like deplatformed or what they call like resulting in a social death, and how is kind of a more, you know, dispersed regime of surveillance? Do you think there's a continuity between the two, or there's a very different kind of regime of disciplining and surveilling nowadays? And maybe because, you know, we're talking about approaching this artistically, what would be, right, kind of the artistic methods of dealing with surveillance, or the visual language of surveillance today?
Oh, this is really interesting. I'm a little bit afraid I will not be able to really give a good answer to it, because I just can suppose what the surveillance system of nowadays Russia is working like, you know. And definitely, I'm sure that they are up to the date with the things, and of course you can see that people are persecuted, and they are addressed, and they are found, so that the system works as it worked before. But definitely it is not analogous. Before it was analogous, now it is digital. Oh, I didn't understand. I'm sorry. Again, what could you formulate again the question for me? It's absolutely interesting. I would like to speak about Palestine.
Well, I can give one example. I invited a philosopher from Beirut to speak in my university in Berlin, and before his speech would take place, his lecture would take place, an anonymous dossier was compiled and sent to me by the administration that included all the letters that he had signed in support or in solidarity with Palestine. And the claim was that he's anti-Semitic because, you know, he's supporting or he's expressing his support for Gaza. So there was already kind of a regime of surveillance, social media surveillance that was at place, and when the announcement, public announcement of his talk came up, just the day after I received this dossier. So there is kind of widespread, I mean, I think at least, you know, in Germany and in places like Austria, culture of following people's social media posts, reporting, defaming with right-wing media or with conservative media. So yes, I think thank you for also helping me to concretize it.
Well, there is, of course, a new dimension because of the media, and we are much more transparent and kind of. It's obvious that this kind of feeling that the danger of being caught because of your mindset is here, and it's absolutely actual, not only in countries you named, but also in Slovakia and everywhere else. It is definitely so. Now the question is what artists can how we can what we can do. I would like that young generation and the young artists would take this task on. You know, I feel like I'm at the end of my production career, and I would like to be more into these kind of things, but I'm afraid that I have to give the, what do you call, stafette piece to people who are now on the at the public stage. But I definitely can only say that it is a disaster, and this disaster is unfortunately looks like it goes further and further, and the fear, the anxiety is on the top at the moment of anything what can happen at any part of the, first of all on these focus points like Gaza. What else? Tell me. I mean, Sudan. But also here in Europe, here in Germany, and
it's against the constitution in Slovakia now to be gay. It's against the constitution. They made it something that's against the constitution.
No, it's Slovakian constitution put up the two sexes, female and male, as a core of the national identity. Yeah, so this is what happened. In practice, it means that all trans people are all these things is going to shrink completely, which was never really good, but now it's even shrinking. Yeah, and of course the what do you call disinfo scene? I'm a little bit not in the English vocabulary with this. The disinformation scene, which is working in my country, is now a very strong, and it is constantly how to say, now killing all the good deeds by putting us as that all this kind of thing is just the illness which needs to be stopped, like psychiatry and whatever. Yeah. So this is how I feel momentarily. But I have to say, I'm not prepared to speak about these things in such a such a way I would like to, because I'm full of fear of what is going on, and I'm also afraid of that if Trump and Putin will manage, so we will have a problem to meet again, because Slovakia will be part of the other bloc. This I'm almost convinced.
Thanks so much for this touching sharing memories. Actually, looks like we are only two who have living memories of Soviet Union. And actually, as far as I remember or comprehend, actually your stay in Soviet Union was actually split exactly 6 and 6. 6 first from 79 to 85 was the most darkest days of Soviet Union. You know, with the invasion of Afghanistan and death of Brezhnev. And maybe
yes,
people don't know, but we know. But same time then came perestroika, and actually it was completely kind of new political situation and openness. But my question also how it influenced that period, your work, actually maybe not this piece, but in general. And then second, when I saw first time your piece in 2017 at Documenta, I was really surprised how powerfully you managed to make revival of Moscow romantic conceptualism. So for me, the question how maybe you comprehend that influence, because it came much later, because the days of your stay in Soviet Union was high days of Moscow conceptualism. And that's actually the traces of the poetry and documentation like Lev Rubinstein, cards, and many other things definitely come to mind. But at the same time, you start to develop this aesthetic in film with the glass. It was really surprising revival how that heritage or legacy is important for you, or maybe you run kind of parallel. I don't know if it's quick.
Good question. I mean, yes. I see my artistic work during my time in Moscow, which is 80s, as you know, complete mistrust to the because being surveilled and friends of mine being interrogated at KGB about myself because of the paragraph on same-sex relationships. You get 8 years of gulag, you know, all these things. I didn't. There was a mistrust that perestroika will stay with us. You know, that we were. Our circle was sure that soon they will imprison all people who are speaking loudly about glasnost. Yeah, the glasnost will finish with the big wave to the gulag of people. So this is what we thought. But at the same time, we also understood of how the country is completely depleted, economically, psychically, and it is like growing. We called it entropy. You know, that it was like the death of forms of the society, in a way, which is coming to an end. And at that time, my idea what to do was to make evidences of something which is disappearing. Yeah, so I was taking the photograph, and I was taking photos of women on the street, because women were the bearers of the old work. The life ran on female stubbornness to feed the children and family and stay in the queues and so on with less and less products in the shops. So that was the thing for me to sort of memorize what is something which tomorrow will not exist anymore. This kind of end of the time was there. At the same time, on the streets you could find a lot of things thrown out at the garbage, and I was taking out these photos from the garbage and from different things, and I was making collages. Some of these photos are also in these 33 situations as some kind of evidence of the time, yeah, and which suddenly interfered into my story, you know. Like I found it on the street, and someone dropped it, so I put it in, and this was my idea to restore, not restore, but to store a memory of what is disappearing. Strangely enough, it is back.
I think on that note, thank you so much for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you for being here with me.